Hey everybody, Shibby here. I posted a video yesterday talking about building out my alpha graded set. It was a opening video where we kind of went through all of the CGC cards that I got in. And there were some questions that came up afterwards like, hey, why did you choose CGC? And I went into this eyes wide open because I've heard many times a lot of criticisms about CGC. I think a lot of them are warranted. I'm not trying to overly defend them, but I do think sometimes a lot of the points that are being made are purely from a place of emotion. And I think there's always an opportunity to really look at the data and try to find a little bit more about the factual details. So that's what we're going to do in this video. So I've got a little bit of a presentation built out. Kind of awkward to present it that way, but there really is a lot of data here. So what we're going to talk about is which grading company has been used the most for sorcery, and specifically alpha. I think that's the best set to look at. Obviously, a lot of collector appeal, and also, alpha didn't have any exclusive promos from other content creators and things like that. It was all Kickstarter. So everything that's graded through alpha is graded from community members. The second thing we'll do is kind of talk about grading companies and how they define their scales. And then we'll also actually look at the data. We'll see what proportions of grades are given out for each of these companies. So, this is my personal collection that started there on the right. That was before the box opening that I did yesterday. Of course, I didn't get any pristine 10s, but got a bunch of 10s and gem mint 10s and several 9s and things like that. So let's just dive in. So the very first thing we'll look at here is the total card count that have been graded by the 4 big companies. Yes, there's probably 1 or 2 or 3 other grading companies to consider, but honestly, I think those are going to be really small. Some emerging companies like Tag and others, yeah, cool, maybe. But I think these are the big 4 that people talk about. In Discord, I mentioned why I like CGC and kind of gave some pros and cons for each of these. But looking at just the raw data, I was actually kind of surprised by this. I truly did not know that CGC had the biggest market share of graded cards so far. They have 35.5%. That's followed by BGS at 24.6%, and then PSA at 23.3%, and finally PCG at 16.6. I think the thing to call out here is, of course, most of these are kind of longer established companies. PCG is really just getting going over the past few years. So naturally, they're going to maybe have some lag, some latency in terms of getting adoption. But very factually, this is the data. This is the exact number of cards that have been graded as of today based on each of these companies' pop reports. So let's dive in now, kind of talking about some of the grades. So each of these companies have different grading scales. And I think that's what creates a lot of the complexity and emotion when kind of talking about, is one company better than the other? It's very difficult to draw parallels between these grades. Looking at PCG, we've got the pristine 10 quad, a pristine 10, a gem mint 10, 9, 5, and 9. For CGC, again, the company that I chose, pristine 10 with a gold label, gem mint 10, and then a 9, 5, and a 9. Beckett, everybody has always found so much prestige in the black label and the 10 pristine. And I think when people get that 9.5, they're also incredibly excited. And a BGS 9 is certainly good as well. And PSA is kind of like, screw it. I'm just going to have 2 grades. We're going to have a PSA 10 and a PSA 9, and nothing too fancy about that. So I've kind of got, those all detailed out here. I'm going to briefly show the actual scales from each company's website. Starting at PCG, at the very top, I mean, they're using really strong words like flawless and 50-50. It starts to kind of very lightly tiptoe into nearly flawless, still calling out 50-50, a little bit of leeway in one direction or the back. 9.5 marginally missing out on some eye appeal, 55-45. I've got this noted as green because what you'll find in all of the other grading scales, 55-45 is a very, very good centering grade. And then for 9, a few slight visible imperfections in 60-40. So now let's look at CGC. They kind of start off right off the bat, kind of softening the language a little bit. They say it's a virtually flawless card. The centering is 50-50, but again, they didn't come out totally perfect. Then they have the Gem Mint 10, that gets into the 55-45. So going back, again, 55-45 on the Gem Mint 10, kind of starting to draw some parallels somewhere between these two, the Pristine 10 and the 9.5. And then down to the 9, it's like 60-40, and then we don't even care what the back looks like. It can be 90-10. I think that's pretty funny, kind of ridiculous. So for BGS, again, like really strong language, 50-50 on the front, perfect to the naked eye, lots of references to perfection. The Gem Mint 9.5, again, very highly regarded within the industry. They do say a little bit of speck of wear is allowed, and then the 9, kind of again, just some slight changes. And then the PSA 10, again, fairly soft language. And I think what happens here is PSA really does not have what I would consider a super premium grade. They're already saying like 10 is as good as it gets. There can be some slight imperfection, 55-45. And then the 9, again, kind of just calling out further details here. And similar to CGC, they're like, we don't even care what the back looks like. It can be 90-10, that's fine. So we've talked about some data. I hope this is interesting. You can always pause it, go back, see some of what's there. I'm a data guy. I like talking about data. I like facts. We'll start to tiptoe into a little bit of the emotional side. I think when we get cards graded, I kind of put it into a few different buckets. This is subjective. This is just how I think about it. But if I get that highest tier, I'm incredibly happy. I can still get a good grade and have no disappointment. I can get a grade and I'm like, it's not bad. It'll go in the collection. I'm not really disappointed, but I'm also not thrilled. And then you kind of get the participation award where it's like anything that is maybe, again, less than a 9 is what I've kind of subjectively stated throughout this presentation. For me, anything less than a 9 is like, that sucks. It is what it is. So we're going to get into now the grades for each of these. And you'll see some of this carried through. So I'm starting with PCG. They've got those 3 what I would call super premium grades. And then they've got the 9.5, the 9, and then all lower. For now, I'm kind of grouping these up because I think if someone were to get a Gem Mint 10 or a Pristine 10 or a Quad, like this is Gold Star. This is really, really good. And that represents about 12.4% of grades given. Next is the 9.5. This is, again, a really, really strong grade. I think people are going to be really happy with the PCG 9.5. And then on the 9, 41.5 down to a 3. And then you've got the participation award, which is all lower grades. So again, anything less than a 9, I don't think people are generally going to be very happy with. So now let's look at CGC. They've got 18.3% in what I would consider their super premium grade. I'll draw some conclusions at the end. I do think this is a little bit high. I think the ratio here might be a little much. It's not entirely out of bounds because, again, if you go back to the PCG, looking at those super premium grades, 12.4%, Pristine 10, 18.3%, fairly close. And then you've got the Gem Mint 10. This is what I got a lot of yesterday. I mentioned in my box opening, 45% of my submission came back as a Gem Mint 10. Pretty pleased with that. And then again, for me, it's like, well, 9.5 or 9, it's not bad. That'll work. It goes in the collection. I'm not super thrilled with it, but it's okay. And then anything less, 6.2%. So now let's look at BGS. I think this is an outlier, quite frankly. Their black label and their pristine, they just don't give those out. And again, this is for Alpha Sorcery. 0.7%. A very, very low number of cards have gotten that prestigious grade. 30.3 have gotten the 9.5 Gem Mint. Again, this number's really low. And what stood out to me is like, if you got a BGS 9.5 or better, man, you're going to be pretty happy with that. The 9 falls into their bulk, and then the lower grades at 11%. I think, again, what you see here is the distribution skewed much more to the right. It's hard to get those highest grades, and I think the feedback that the community gives about the difficulty of grading BGS, I think this demonstrates it's very warranted. And then PSA, again, this is a little bit tricky. I mean, obviously, if you get a PSA 10, that's your gold medal. You're not going to get better than that, so you're naturally going to be happy. I think it gets a little bit fuzzy, though, drawing parallels, because if you get a 9, it's like, are you happy with that or are you not? So again, with them not having a super premium grade, it's just a little bit tricky to do that. I think it's basically PSA 10 or bust. But I think some people would be happy with the 9s. So that's the data. We're now going to tiptoe a little bit further into opinion. I'll share my opinion. I welcome yours as well. But I tried to draw a few correlations here, a few comparables across these companies. I think it's very hard. Again, what I did is I took that table I presented a moment ago and tried to categorize them. And again, this green box at the top is what I would call the super premiums. I do put the CGC Pristine 10 in there, but again, little spoiler at the end, I think this is a little high. I think some of the criticism about this is warranted. That said, it's not that much higher than PCG. I think the BGS is the one that is just really, really prestigious. The next one that goes down, again, I tried to categorize these based on what I see, not just subjectively, but also in the data. 43% of submissions to PCG got a 9.5. That's very much in line to 46% at CGC. I think these two grades are very comparable. Maybe some of the emotion comes in, people get very fueled by the concept of a 10. And they say, oh, CGC just gives, easy grades to everybody. I think, again, it just depends on the grading scale. So draw your own conclusions. These are mine. But for this, what I would call the silver tier, these grades are good. Again, PSA, we've already mentioned this. It's a little bit hard to box out, like, should they be super premium, a 10, etc. And then in terms of the next one, if you get a PCG 9, I think that's pretty comparable to a CGC 9.5 or a 9, somewhere in there, and pretty comparable to a BGS 9. Again, some of these numbers don't match up perfect, but I really tried hard in the data, guys, just to bridge the communications so that we can look at things, look at the data, and maybe we can speak each other's languages. And then again, ultimately, I think when you grade cards, if you get anything less than a 9, you're pretty disappointed. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but I don't think that's what anybody hopes for. So wrapping up the video here, I've got 2 slides left. These are my takeaways. BGS appears to be the toughest grade, and that's very clear in the data. If you get a BGS 9.5, you're doing good. Second takeaway, I think the CGC Pristine 10 is kind of a premium. But I think, again, those are being given out at a higher rate than what I think the true premium cards are. I could go back and look at some of my cards. I've got a few of these. I'll try to compare it to the grading scales that are published by the company to see if it really is in line with what they said. I think there's some room here to say that some of the CGC Pristine 10, based on the data, gets a little bit more than they should. I don't think that is true of the criticisms communicated by the CGC Gem Mint 10. I think, again, maybe it's just the nomenclature. Maybe it's the idea of kind of saying the word 10. But a CGC 10 and a PCG 9.5 and a PSA 10, all of those have data and distributions that are very comparable. So I draw those as fairly consistent grades. It's hard to draw these standards, all of these different grading scales with 5 of them, 4 of them, 2 of them, etc. So then the very last slide here is, also people grade cards for different reasons. I was even just immediately before this video looking at some of what people said, and it can be as much as like local proximity to the grader. It can be that they like the visual appeal, they don't like the visual appeal, they trust the company, they don't trust the company. There's lots of reasons, but this is not new. Does anybody want a Coke or a Pepsi? Do you want to fight over whether Apple or Android is better? There's lots of choices that consumers get to make in the market, and it really doesn't do anybody any good to kind of shame or criticize. And that goes to my next point, which is I'm not smarter than you and you're not smarter than me. And I would just love it if we can acknowledge that some of these grading companies are a little bit fluid and flawed, and how I choose to spend my money and how you choose to spend your money. We love this game. It's an awesome game. We all love Sorcery, the art, the gameplay. We want more of it. We want better communications, all those things. But the more that we can kind of respect each other's opinions, I think it goes a really long way. And then, I'll just say here, these grading companies, in some ways, they all kind of suck. They've all kind of screwed up in different ways. We have all of these singular examples that we turn into these very emotive discussions about, oh my gosh, I saw this one example and it was just awful. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that for every criticism that we put towards a company, there's probably lots more that we could put towards the others. So pick your poison. Go with the one that you feel to be most in line with what you're looking for. So that's it. I hope you all enjoyed this video. There's a lot of data here. Maybe you could go back and reference it. Consider giving it a thumbs up. If you like this type of content, give it a subscribe. But hope you all have a great rest of the day, and talk soon.